Stars
Podcast. This is the
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Yo. You know, it's funny too. Right before I started this podcast, I had the thought trickling in the back of my head that maybe it'd kind of be cool to use Hall's gimmick to open up the show every week. Of course, no one beats the originator, so I ended up leaving it be. Man, that was a hard loss to take. You know, I guess in a way I kind of prepped myself for it. You know, as soon as I read the reports about him being put on life support, instinctually I think I knew that it was only a matter of time. I mean, 3 heart attacks in the same night following complications with surgery. That's far from negligible. Of course, growing up watching Scott Hall in his prime and knowing of all his trials and tribulations throughout his life, guy's been through a lot. And whether he was Razor Ramon or just plain old Scott Hall, dude was a major talent. He was an impeccable star that I think a lot of people really overlook with him throughout his career. I remember watching old tapes of him in the AWA back in '86, some of his tag work with Curt Hennig when Hall was very new to the business, and man, you compare that with WWF Razor Ramon or NWO Scott Hall by the mid to late 90s, it doesn't even seem like the same person. But he was a one-of-a-kind talent, dedicated to the business, very professional, and and even if he got caught up with the wrong crew or developed a bad reputation with some of the boys throughout his career, I think even those people would acknowledge just how important Scott Hall was to the business. He was a key to probably one of the most pivotal moments in recent wrestling history in the mid to late 90s during the Monday Night War era of WWF versus WCW. I think wrestling historians have effectively done a good job of always painting that the original NWO group, the trio with Hogan, Nash, and Hall, and the group basically all being centered around Hogan as the focal point, with Hall and Nash as the glue that bound everything together. It is important to keep in mind that Hall was the first guy to show up on Nitro in May of '96 to do that famous promo that we all remember. And he really kickstarted things into another gear with the whole challenge to Vince and WWF on Monday nights. And Hogan was kind of seen as the poster face of the NWO in terms of being the top heel champion, the merch seller, and the guy at the top of the dominance hierarchy, if you will. But yeah, you could really make the case at the same time that Hall and Nash were right on that same level as Hogan too. And obviously you fast forward later on in his career where his personal life started to get a little more public. People started becoming more aware of his issues with drugs and alcohol. I think it's kind of easy to see him in a different light after his career winds down and you start falling into the trap of dismissing him as a fuck up, even though, he goes through the attempts to rehab and clean up himself. And I've certainly found myself in a boat like that a time or two throughout my life. I read the reports on the arrest charges, the substance abuse. I think there may have been a domestic abuse charge during the mid to late 2010s that I left out. It's tough, because when the time finally does come where you read about him being put on life support and that his chances of survival are slim to none, and you start to rethink your perceptions of him from earlier years and wonder whether or not you were too harsh on him. If you should have had more faith in him to get better. I don't know. I really don't. Because like I said, it really seemed like he was on track to get better in his latter years, but too little, too late. But I won't take away from what the guy was able to do in the ring, because he was something else. So, with that said, I think that would be a good time to get going with the program this week. Again, this is the 5 Starr Wrestling Report podcast, here each Monday and Friday on YouTube and Rumble. If you're new to the show, make sure to subscribe, like the show, and leave a comment to share any insight that you have on the topics we discussed today. We've got AEW Dynamite to run down, and we've also got the continuation of our retro review series on NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. All of that on the docket today. We'll, of course, get to the good stuff at the end with the classic content, but as always, I like to run down AEW first, so we'll get going with that. Again, if you're archiving this stuff for the record books, this is the March 16th edition. So they kicked off with the 6-man tag, trios tag, whatever they're calling it now. Undisputed Era versus the Jurassic Express and Hangman Adam Page. And this was, of course, set up from Cole last week because, well, I don't know why. He was pissed about losing to Page at the pay-per-view, so he booked a 6-man for this week where he let Page pick his own partners. What a class act. Now, I'll say this out of the gate. Not having the Beta Bucks in there automatically made this match about 1,000 times better than it probably would have been had they thrown in the Trampoline Play Kids. And I'd say for about the first 5 or so minutes, it was well on its way to being a moderately passable tag match per AEW standards. And by the time it was over, it ended up turning into every AEW tag match you've ever seen. And if you've heard me review an AEW tag match before, I don't really need to fill you in with the details. Just go watch every AEW recap I've done in the last 4 months. You'll know what I'm talking about. It's actually kind of amazing to me how quickly things can just shift on a dime with AEW matches. Like 1 minute I'm watching Jungle Boy sell while the heels are working him over on the mat. They're doing constant tags in and out. It all makes sense. It's all logical. And then Hangman Page gets tagged in. All 6 guys end up in the ring doing a bunch of pre-planned WWE-looking spots. And Page ends up doing all these dives and flips to the outside where the camera ends up missing half of them because he's moving too goddamn fast. Like the triple moonsault spot they all did probably looked visually appealing to the crowd. But watching it at home, it's impossible for the ringside camera crew to catch all 3 guys in motion. So instead of them cutting to the wide shot before they show the replay, all we see the first time is Jungle Boy doing a moonsault to Fish across the ring, Luchasaurus kind of catching O'Reilly in the frame, and Page flew completely out of the frame entirely, and we never even saw him connect with Cole. Whoever's in charge of production on this show is fucking horrible at his job. And again, aside from the fact that I still had no idea why this match was happening to begin with, why the fuck is the finish Adam Cole pinning Jungle Boy? What did that do for anyone? If the feud between Cole and Page is going to continue, then it should be Cole getting the pin on Page through nefarious means. Or at the very least, if you have to pin Jungle Boy, it should be O'Reilly or Fish pinning him so that it sets up a tag match for those guys at a later date. You know, common sense booking. Of course, I know why they did what they did here. Tony Khan didn't want to beat the world champion, but he still wanted Cole to get the pin. Because he has no idea what he's doing. And, I mean, I'm not even going to get hung up on the whole Page-Cole rematch. It makes no sense. You know, Paige won the pay-per-view match clean as a sheet. There's nowhere to go in a title feud when you put your babyface champion over the heel challenger in the first fucking title defense clean. Like, unless you were going to go with Paige winning via DQ or something, or do some kind of double count out or draw, why do we need to see this match again? So they can do their 87th garbage hardcore plunder match in the last 2 months? Again, I ask, would it kill Tony to just hire a booker or, God forbid, work with agents that have a clue? You got Arn and Tully there. You got Sting. You got Kevin Sullivan somewhere. You got Dean Malenko and Jerry Lynn in the background. Last I checked, they were all still cognizant and functioning. And they worked in a period where wrestling actually made sense from a booking standpoint. I don't know, maybe you try to work with them so they can offer suggestions to better enhance the quality of your television show, instead of taking your advice from a bunch of green, inexperienced kids or indie marks that grew up watching Crash TV nonsensical wrestling. But what do I know? Then we got Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley versus Chuck Boy, Fuckboy Taylor, and Wheeler Yuta. Why? No, seriously, why? Why is Bryan Danielson being affiliated with the company mascot and the goddamn mime? And by the way, Excalibur half-assedly explaining to William Regal that Danhausen is very nice and very evil does not count as getting a character over to a nationally televised audience. Just thought I'd key you in with that one. And of course, the match has Chucky Sucky in there, so you know his shit's gonna look ghetto as fuck. I'm still not sold on the pairing of Mox and Danielson. I don't get it. I don't think their styles mesh at all. It all just comes across like every WWE makeshift pairing of a team you've seen in the last 20 years. It's, we don't know what to do with you, and we don't know what to do with you, so here, you're a team now. Go try and make something resembling chemistry in the ring together. I mean, albeit some guys have been talented enough to pull it off over the years. Goldust and Booker did it. Rock and Foley did it. Owen and Yokozuna did it. Kane and Danielson did it a decade ago. But for my money, this pairing just doesn't do it for me. Danielson has been absolutely phenomenal on the show as a singles guy. He's had great matches with a wide range of talent over the last several months, and now you're going to cut off all that momentum by throwing him in there in a tag team? Why? With Moxley, no less. And look, I'll even put aside my personal distaste for Mox as a worker for a minute. But the guy just came back from rehab not that long ago. And right out of the gate, your big idea for him is to put him in a tag team setting without even really giving him a proper single showcase for a while? Didn't he say in one of his return promos that he has unfinished business when it comes to the world title? Not saying that I would have been foaming at the mouth to see him and Hangman Page have a world title match, but at least it would have been immediately putting him in a big featured position when he was red hot coming back. But instead of doing that, they took two of their top guys, threw them together for reasons that still haven't been well explained, and on top of that, the match really wasn't all that good. Oh, by the way, hell of a time to cut the commercial during the match. Right when Mox puts Taylor in an armbar submission hold. Yeah, because how stupid of me. Why would we think that Taylor might actually submit to a move like that? I don't know about you. I couldn't think of a more apropos time to cut to a break when a guy's screaming in agony on a mat while his arm is wrenched back, possibly on the verge of either passing or tapping out. Gotta get that ad revenue. And look, take out my complete and utter revulsion for anything on the show involving the best friends. I'll even look at this modestly for a minute and pretend like I have some kind of emotional attachment to Mox and Danielson as a tag team. This is their second TV match as a team, going up against an undercard job team, no less. So A, why is this match going over 10 minutes? And B, why is it competitive? Whether or not people want to admit this, Tony Khan included, the best friends are a fucking joke, and they've been a fucking joke since day one. It's a bunch of indie slapstick goofballs that are all paired together in a giant schmoz, and the only people that care about them are the diehard AEW marks that would pop if Tony Khan waltzed down to the ring in the middle of the show, dropped his pants, and left a big old turd Ferguson in the middle of the ring. They're not a credible team, they're not a top team, and they shouldn't be viewed or seen as a top team in any major wrestling organization with a brain. If Bill Watts took one look at these idiots, he'd have fired them all on the spot and probably would have kicked Cassidy and Danhausen in the balls on their way out the door. But on this show, I'm watching Danielson and Moxley sell for these morons. What fucking criminal joke. Now, I'll say this. The Aftermath angle with Yuta teasing that he was actually going to ditch the clown posse to join up with Danielson and Mox, that's a good start for the young chap. It's one step closer to saving Yuta's career from eternal damnation after all the garbage he's been involved with on this show in the last year. Hopefully it's more than a dick tease and they actually go through with it. Still won't even care about the pairing, but might give Yuta some credibility back. We had FTR and the Bucks in a horrible backstage skit where the only thing I wanted was for FTR to just punt those dorks in their shriveled up testes. Sadly, FTR just stood there like morons while Matt Jackson pretended to be intimidating. Eventually, we got the Inner Circle 2.0 out for a promo. Actually, when you think about it for a minute, it's such a downgraded version of the original Inner Circle. I almost kind of long for the days of when the Inner Circle mattered. This iteration of the factions only existed for 14 days. And before I rip into it, I do want to put over one thing here. I noted last week how Jericho has seemed to have gotten himself in relatively good shape in the last few months. I don't know where the spark of motivation came from, but the early 2022 version of Chris Jericho looks so much better than the old gray fat version of Jericho from last year, where it looked like he totally gave up on going to the gym, much less dyeing his hair. And of course, with this new faction, that's totally not just a low-rent carbon copy of the original Inner Circle. Of course, they all come out to Judas, which probably would have been great if they'd have trolled the people by maybe playing the first few seconds of the instrumental intro before swerving everyone and then debuting some kind of new song to fit the group. But no, new faction is still running with the song that the people cheer for and sing along to. And not to drag this out any longer than absolutely necessary, here's the extent of what I wrote down about this segment. The newest incarnation of Chris Jericho in 2022 is that he's a sports entertainer, which is apparently supposed to get heat from me. Yet on the same wrestling show where virtually everything they do is watered-down carbon copies of sports entertainment wrestling, Chris Jericho is the first to actually embrace it and recognize it on television. Why would I boo this? This is not a groundbreaking revelation from Jericho. I could have told you the same thing about AEW's product the first time I watched the Casino Battle Royal back in 2019 when they had every fucking representation of the inclusive rainbow in there. I'm more so just confused as to what the whole point of the group is. I mean, we already know it's just another ego-stroking mechanism to try and keep Jericho relevant, but where exactly does the sports entertainment thing come into play? What does that mean? So Jericho's group is going to do a bunch of wacky WWE Raw TV matches? Whoopee. It's not like it'd be any worse than most AEW matches we get in a given week. And let me get this straight, just so we're all on the same page here. The Jericho Appreciation Society, the faction driven to bring us sports entertainment, consists of the top guy who made his career with the opposition of being a sports entertainer, a young kid that can wrestle well but has nothing resembling entertaining value or charisma, two loudmouth job geeks that are actually starting to get go-away heat with me, considering how often I feel like they've been forced down my throat in recent months, and a big guy with the personality of tree bark. I fail to see where the entertainment portion comes into play. So then we get Warlow versus Scorpio Sky for the TNT Championship, a match that I was actually interested to see with how they would pay it off, considering the fallout to the Wardlow MJF story from the pay-per-view. And I guess here's the best way I can put it. The match sucked, but this was probably one of those rare instances in AEW where I was actually more intrigued to see the run-in stuff at the end because I knew it was evident, and let's be honest, actually warranted here. What happens is Wardlow starts giving Scorpio these series of power bombs, and as he goes for the final blow, Shawn Spears starts coming out from the top of the stage with chairs. So again, it's every WWE distraction angle you've ever seen where the guy's totally in control of the match, but then a guy comes out from the back, and even though he's like 100 feet away from the ring, it's enough for the guy in the ring to just stop kicking ass to do the mile-long stare down. It's such a dumb spot, but that's wrestling for you in 2022. Everything's stupid. So Wardlow goes to fetch Scorpio from the outside and throw him back in the ring. The ref's trying to get him back into the ring. So while the ref's dealing with trying to get Spears away from the ring, yes, the ref was very concerned with Shawn Spears being out there all by his lonesome. All the while, Dan Lambert's crew's out there running amok the whole entire time. Ref doesn't care. Just Shawn Spears, apparently, he had a problem with. And evidently, that leads to MJF running in from behind, shoving Wardlow face first into the post, knocking him loopy, essentially. And as Warlow rolls back in, Scorpio gives him a flimsy-looking cradle to retain. Of course, that immediately leads to the heat angle afterwards. MJF ends up paying off Lambert, which really didn't make sense to me at all. Like, why is MJF paying Lambert for helping him screw over Wardlow? Like, the run-in wasn't even all that complex of an idea. All you need is two brain cells to rub together and just go, hey, Shawn, you come down the aisleway, I'll sneak in from the back door and shove Wardlow into the post, and boom, we got him. I failed to see where Lambert's crew fits into the whole equation, aside from helping Spears attack Wardlow after the fact. So Wardlow ends up fending off everyone, lays out Shawn momentarily, and it's MJF and Wardlow in the ring alone. Crowd went nuts for that, by the way. It was a great teaser. And Shawn, of course, comes in, ends up giving Wardlow a not-so-good-looking chair shot to the head. Protected, of course, but kind of whiffed him on the blow. And then MJF laid him out with the diamond ring afterwards. And, of course, the geniuses running the show on All Excessive Wrestling. Got to make sure we cram in our 6 weeks worth of content into 2 hours. So, less than a minute after MJF leaves Wardlow laying, Excalibur is already plugging upcoming segments. They immediately cut to commercial, and they never revisit the angle at any point in the show. No replay, no discussion, no health update on Wardlow's condition. Nope. Just moving on to the next segment as we got to keep things rolling on too much shit going on wrestling, where nothing has any impact or stain. That leads into the debut of the Hardy Boys, taking on Private Party. Yes, the Hardy Boys' first match back together as a team, and not only is it booked on free TV with a week's build, but they don't even give them the top of the hour segment. Just buried in the middle of the show with no pre-match packages or anything. Just, here you go. Matt and Jeff back in action as a team. Go. But don't worry, everyone. Tony Khan's a great booker. He knows what he's doing. So what can you say about the match? No, honestly, what can you say? I remembered virtually nothing about it the minute it was over. I mean, it wasn't bad. Obviously, Jeff slowed down a considerable amount in the last several years. I didn't follow much of his main roster stuff in WWE in the last 3 or 4 years, but I mean, obviously it comes with age. 2022 Jeff Hardy is not going to be 2002 level Jeff Hardy. Or maybe even 2012 Jeff Hardy, if you don't even want to go back that far. The other thing I noticed here was how quiet the crowd was for a lot of it. Like, they definitely popped for the initial Hardy Boys entrance, and they even gave Jeff a little bit of a babyface reaction when he got tagged in for the first time, but there were definitely periods here where they were kind of sitting and waiting around for something big to happen. And obviously, once Jeff got the hot tag at the end, they came to life again. I'll say this, though, because as shitty as Jeff's debut was, and the fact that I'm still not on board with the Hardys feuding with Andrade and his group of mediocre goons, this is probably the most interested I've been with anything involving Matt Hardy in a long time. It noted in order to make Matt relevant again, they had to go back to the well with reuniting the Hardy Boys for like the 16th time in 10 years. But I'll even put it this way. It is something to give AEW's tag division a little bit of credibility. Like, the division sucks. They have no top teams. Discount FTR and maybe Red Dragon. And again, fuck the Young Bucks. They're not part of this conversation. The Hardy Boys in AEW instantly make them the top 2, arguably top 1 team in the company. And it does make for some interesting combinations of matches they could do down the road. Whether it's FTR, whether it's Red Dragon. If they really want to go back to the well with it again, they could feasibly do the Beta Bucks, and it would actually kind of make storyline sense if you follow their careers. I think it'd be interesting to see what they would do with teams like the Jurassic Express or even Sting and Darby at some point. So they got options. Yeah, I just think aimlessly spinning their wheels by feuding with Andrade's faction is doing them no favors. And our main event is Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa for the women's title in a cage. Or I guess you could just call it Hell in a Cell without the roof, because that's essentially what it was. Actually, kind of a rare instance where main eventing the women on a wrestling show makes a little bit of sense. And God, with all the pomp and fanfare they gave Rosa here, if they didn't put the belt on her by the end of the night, they would have been fucking idiots. And these people are pretty stupid. So now comes the ultimate question. They've been building this matchup for basically a year. It's probably the hottest program AEW's done for their women's division. And Rosa's probably the hottest as a character she's been since she arrived in the company. All the cards are in the right place. The dynamics of the characters were on spot here. Clear-cut villain, clear-cut hometown babyface. I could even make a valid case that the cage match sufficed as a proper blow-off given the fallout to the pay-per-view and Britt's history of needing Rebel and Hater to interfere and help her win her matches. They went out of their way to present this as a big deal, so I'll give them credit in that domain. It felt like a big match, even if I may have gone about constructing and booking the program a little bit differently. So the big question: how was the match? Well, I like Britt Baker. I'm a big fan of Thunder Rosa. They're good personalities. They're good workers. They try to accommodate to the cage environment, to do something different. this just didn't work. I'm sorry. It was not a good match. Both girls seemed very out of place and lost for the majority of it. Their punches looked awful. Their rope running was awkward. It was very slow-paced and jerky for a lot of it. Of course, poor Britt's out there trying to gig herself with a blade on the outside, and she did such an awful blade job, it didn't even look like she opened herself up. And of course, with Rosa, she ended up gigging later on in the match, but like she already had face paint on with a little bit of red design on it, so it was like impossible to tell how much of it was blood and how much of it was paint. And by the end, it ends up turning into every garbage outlaw match in the book. Chairs, tacks, the whole 9 yards. It's honestly gone to a point now where every time I see tacks in wrestling, I immediately become disengaged. It's like clockwork for me. As soon as the bag comes out from under the ring, I immediately stop caring. And granted, I stopped caring about this well before the tacks were brought out. I think I gave up after the spot where Britt took the bump onto the stacked chairs in the corner, and then less than 30 seconds later, she was outside the ring on her feet grabbing the tacks from under the ring. No logic to that. And because no one agents these goddamn things, instead of doing one thumbtack spot and being done with it, they have to do like 3 or 4, all of which are progressively less impactful than the previous. The match goes way too long. Both girls are totally blown up by the end. And after Rosa wins, it ends up feeling like a popcorn fart instead of this huge climactic moment. By the way, anyone else laugh at the spot after the match where they cut to the reactions and they cut to the guy in the crowd sporting the Sin Cara mask and the Beta Bucks t-shirt? Of all the fucking crowd shots to go to, what a toll that guy looked like. Did I miss anything here? I think even the AEW sheep would have to agree that this match was no good. Like, unless you're into the bloody hardcore garbage and for some reason you have some sick perversion with seeing the women do this stuff to themselves. And maybe more or less that was my overall problem with the match. Because I know I've talked before about how I really don't like seeing women do hardcore matches. There's just something really off-putting about it, and even more so than watching the men do it. And there's proper ways to do cage match blow-offs in wrestling without it resorting to the garbage stuff, but it just seems more often than not, man, this is the go-to in wrestling anymore. When in doubt, break out the plunder. It doesn't feel authentic, it doesn't look appealing, and it doesn't carry the same weight or gravity or even drama that real grudge matches do when you're just resorting to hitting each other over the head with shit for 10 plus minutes. I don't know what there is else to say about it. I'm glad they finally got the belt off Britt. Not that I hated her title reign or anything like that, but, I have talked about where it's started to feel like they're starting to lose ROI with her as champion anymore. Like, she's beaten everyone, and most of her matches have been lackluster to mediocre because of the fact that she really hasn't had any credible challengers to begin with. So, Rosa beating her was the best option they had. I just wish they could have done something equivalent to the pay-per-view match without all the garbage and plunder. But we'll see where the title reign goes. I'm hopeful it'll be a breath of fresh air for the division with Britt out of the title picture for the foreseeable future. Maybe they can do something a little bit different. It'd be great to see Thunder Rosa and Serena Deeb for the belt at some point. And that might be something that they're looking down the road to build towards once Deeb is done with Sheeta. But the division's still missing something. They've considerably cut back on a lot of the bad talent featured on TV, like the Penelope Fords and the Bunnies of the world, and I've already kind of talked about that before. But there's just not a lot of depth with the division. Thunder Rosa is the champion now. That's a little bit of something new, but it kind of leaves Britt pissing in the wind for the time being, and aside from Serena Deeb, I don't really know of any challengers off the top of my head that I have an interest in seeing Rosa feud with right now. I don't know where Ruby Riott is. I think I heard she was injured or something like that, but yeah, it's just not a stacked women's roster. And I mean, I've always felt this way, but AEW's recruitment of female talent is not good. I have much more interest in seeing a lot of the girls in WWE than I do AEW. You know, like I said, they got a couple nuggets here and there with Deeb and Rosa, but that's about it. So, unless they're signing new girls or trying to bring in some people in the coming months, the title change was cool, but it still doesn't leave me hopeful for anything in the future involving the girls on this show. It's just the way I see it. Kind of a dud to go out on, but, like I said, I was already kind of over the show by the time we got to the main event anyway. It's another show where they just hotshot a bunch of shit, and by the end, a lot of it just doesn't stick. I'm already a jaded wrestling fan as it is, but even watching the Hardy Boys back in action together felt like a total miss. And they've already pretty much phoned it in for Rampage on Friday because of the NCAA game. What did they say that show was airing at 11:30 on Friday night? God almighty. And the card's a bunch of nothing happening matches anyway. You gotta wonder why they're even bothering airing a show. I'm not expecting that show to do a good number at all. So there you have it. Another Dynamite in the book, and another show that left a whole lot to be desired when it was over. Alright then, simmering down for a minute here, let's dive into some classic content with this week's edition of NWA World Championship Wrestling from March 15th, 1986. Which happened to be another solo Tony Schiavone show, as David Crockett was absent this week. And whereas before, Tony actually went out of the way as to inform us as to why David had been on assignment to cover for him not being there, this week he didn't even mention it. Now, we did get a press conference package later in the program involving the Crockett Cup tournament, and David was at the conference, so perhaps that explained why we did not see him on the show this week, but still very odd that Tony didn't bother explaining that. Tully Blanchard versus Dawn Turner was our opener for the week. And as I've mentioned in previous recaps, the 1986 period was definitely one of those odd times when you look back at wrestling history where the babyface heel dynamic was very out of whack from time to time, especially when it came to some of the more top stars around this point. And this week was one of those cases where the Horsemen were in full-fledged babyface mode with the studio crowd. Even in Tully's best efforts to get the crowd to hate him, he utterly failed at every turn. And I'll tell you, man, you want to know what Tully absolutely mastered as a ring worker? Being a fucking prick. And obviously I don't mean that in a derogatory manner, but I just mean that from a psychological point of view. Tully's ability to just go out there and be a smug, arrogant prick on TV, from the gestures to the facials to the total control he had in the ring, so great. Something equally as great, the follow-up promo with Tully and JJ. We also had more fan heckling after the match, which was probably one of the more notable things about the show in general this week. And the funny thing is, it was really only one subset portion of the crowd, but they were a boisterous bunch from beginning to end. Jimmy Valiant versus Bob Owens was up next. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before when it comes to the job guys working these squashes against Valiant, but the one thing that becomes more and more apparent every time I watch the opening few seconds of a Jimmy Valiant match It's the fact that the job guy has no idea how to even begin the match when Valiant gets in the ring. Like, normally you'd think maybe they'd start with something basic like a chain hold or a collar and elbow tie-up, maybe a couple arm drags here and there. Not in a Jimmy Valiant match. When you're working Valiant, you're either getting raked in the eyes or gouged in the face from the beginning. And at some point you gotta wonder, especially if you're going out of your way to study Jimmy Valiant tapes, how exactly am I supposed to prep for this? And of course, Valiant gets in there. Bob Owens is just standing in the corner like a Nimrod. And Valiant goes over to him, rakes him in the eye, and it's all downhill for Owens then on. Also new to the Jimmy Valiant offensive playbook this week, grabbing Pee Wee Anderson by his hair to plant a kiss on him. This was not grounds for a DQ, apparently. Of course, when you're Jimmy Valiant and every move you do is something DQ worthy, guess it's kind of hard to tell where you draw the line as an official. We had Magnum TA at the booth to continue with one of the most painfully wrenching and drawn-out stories of 1986. He's still waiting for Nikita Koloff to sign the contract for their U.S. heavyweight title match. And literally at this point, it's the same fucking promo every week. Magnum wants the match, Nikita won't sign the contract, Magnum gets pissed, and they continue to hold it off. And it'd be one thing if they gave us more than one occasional angle with the two having a brawl segment during the show to at least keep the feud fresh. But it's another thing when it's like 8 to 9 weeks and they're essentially regurgitating the same promo every week. That's basically what the Magnum TA Nikita Koloff story is right now. Same story, same promo, different week. And it's not making me anticipate the actual match, by the way. In fact, it's starting to get irritating to the point where I'm right about the shit or get off the pot mentality when it comes to that program. Jimmy Garvin wrestled Bill Mulkey. Garvin sporting the bright red suspenders this week. More jaw-jacking on Wahoo McDaniel from Garvin here. Still referring to him as McDaniels. Of course, it's just a squash, but they'd dive a little more into the Garvin Wahoo story later in the program when Garvin came out for his promo. What they followed the match with was something straight out of the fourth dimension. Here's what I wrote down about this segment, and to be frank, I don't think I'm entirely off base with this analogy. Baby Doll cut a promo about something that may or may not have mentioned the Horsemen, that may or may not have been completely drowned out by the crowd. It was so weird. It's like, I saw a Baby Doll with Tony at the booth, and I saw her lips moving. I believe words were spoken, but everything she said was in one ear, out the other, and right before they cut the commercial, Shivani reacted to it like he had no idea what she was talking about either. Just passing it off and moving on like nothing ever happened. Coming back from the break, we had Jim Cornette out to first call out the Road Warriors and tell them to gain a little credibility before ever challenging the Midnight Express to the World Tag Titles ever again. And then he disparaged the Rock and Roll Express for being cowards and backjumpers for beating on Corny at a 2-on-1 advantage last week. In other words, Cornette bringing to light the obvious of what we saw on last week's program of Ricky and Robert double drop kicking Cornette out of the ring. But because Cornette's a great heel, he completely neglects the fact that prior to them giving Corny a little taste of revenge, they had also taken out Bobby and Dennis prior to taking out Cornette. Great stuff. Back when heels thought they were being clever in one way, but completely distorting the reality of what actually occurred in the segment. Almost like professional wrestling used to make sense back in the day. Because heels lied. A novel concept. We had the Midnight Express going up against Phil Brown and Lee Peak. Yep, Lee Peak is still around. But at least Peak was a stupid enough ring name that Corny actually remembered it. I don't believe he ever figured out Phil Brown's full name. I also love Tony botching the name of the Snapmare takeover, and Jim had to remind Tony that he fucked up, claiming that he does not know a wrist lock from a wristwatch. Classic Corny line, especially if you watch his podcast. Of course, the entire story of the match is Dennis and Bobby pretending like they were in jeopardy of losing, all the while they're just beating the ever-loving shit out of these jobber dweebs. There's a great spot where Dennis is yelling for Cornette to come save him from the announce booth, and Corny yells back, and I quote, "I can't do that, Dennis. It's against the rules." Fucking awesome. Again, it's a complete onslaught, total one-sided beatdown, as the Midnights are very good at doing back in the day on these studio shows. Just going out there and having entertaining classic squash matches and beating the shit out of dorks. And if we saw more stuff like this on Dynamite every week with teams like FTR and Red Dragon going in there and demolishing two indie dorks that no one cares about, actually might have more than one segment on AEW to look forward to every week aside from MJF and or CM Punk. But why would we want to feature FTR in a prominent spot? So then we move to the press conference for the 1986 Jim Crockett Sr. Memorial Cup. Again, informing us that they were able to land the Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana to host the tournament. But we're sad to let everyone know that they could not lock down Charlotte as the home base to host the Crockett Cup that year. And man, you could just hear the sadness in most of the Crockett family's tone when they had to deliver the news, especially Jim Crockett Sr.'s wife. They also had PW Insider establish the top 10 seeds for the tournament, as per the announcement from Bill Apter. At number 1, we had the Road Warriors. Number 2, Dusty Rhodes and Magnum TA, which ended up changing to Magnum and Ronnie Garvin before the end of the segment for reasons that I'll explain in a minute. Number 3, the Midnight Express, World Tag Team Champions. Number 4, Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. Again, that changed as well. Number 5, Rick Martel and Dino Bravo. Lol. Number 6, the Rock and Roll Express. Number 7, Tiger Mask and Giant Baba, representing Japan. Number 8, Ivan and Nikita Koloff. Number 9, the Sheep Herders, a.k.a. the Bushwhackers. And number 10, Ted DiBiase and Steve Dr. Death Williams. And following Apter's announcement, we had UWF President Bill Watts inform us of the 2 changes in the seeds due to last-minute scheduling of the NWA World's Heavyweight title match that'll take place as a special attraction for the Superdome show, which ended up being Ric Flair versus Dusty Rhodes. And again, that meant that Ronnie Garvin would replace Dusty as Magnum's partner, and Tully would replace Flair as Arn's partner. Or, I'm sorry, the other way around. Tully would replace Arn. No, he would replace Flair. Yeah, that's right. I got that right. And why they didn't make this announcement before running down the seeds, I couldn't tell you, but just roll with it. And then Watts mentioned something about the show being split into an afternoon and evening show, and the tickets were not eligible at the door for both events, with the more important main event matches taking place in the evening session. So in other words, a clever ticketing promotional tactic on Bill's part to let everyone know, if you plan on attending the afternoon show, you're basically going to get a bunch of prelim matches that don't mean jack shit, but still buy your ticket anyway. And people still did. The whole thing was a big, long infomercial for the Crockett Cup, but I won't complain about it. It was better hype than anything you see in the modern era of pro wrestling. When it was over, I knew that the 1986 Crockett Cup was a big deal, and they made sure to let everyone know it's a can't-miss event, even if the first part of the show is going to feature a bunch of inconsequential throwaway matches. And then following that, we had Arn Anderson at the booth to first bitch about the fact that the Horsemen were seated 4th overall, which is a grave miscarriage of justice when you think about it for more than 2 seconds. But that's all right, because that just means that the Horsemen have a couple obstacles to topple over in order to get that $1 million payout. And then Arn briefly put over Mike Jackson in the ring and said that unlike Dusty, he's actually going to defend his TV title on the show to prove he's a worthy champion. What a good sport. It's a very courageous heel thing for Arn to do on the show. Willingly defending his belt and putting over the competition in the ring. It's the exact kind of thing you'd expect a dastardly villain to do. And of course, that led directly into Arn defending his TV title against Mike Jackson. And if you'll all recall from the beginning of the report, I had mentioned that the studio crowd was extremely lively on this show. Nothing drove that point home further after having watched this match. I think my favorite part of the entire thing is the spot where Mike Jackson gives Anderson, of all things, a hip toss. And this spawns the young black family in the front row to begin a "That's what you deserve" chant. Yes, a simple hip toss. One of the most basic fundamental wrestling moves in the book. That was devastating enough for the crowd to begin heckling Anderson. And to think, Mike Jackson going up against Arn Anderson here for the TV belt, and you'd think Mike Jackson was a long-time top babyface in the NWA territory. These people were fervently behind Jackson, and they were very anti-Arn from beginning to end. So I guess my statement earlier about how the Horsemen were babyfaces on this show from beginning to end, that wasn't entirely true, because Arn was definitely hated in this match. I have no idea why the people were into the idea of Mike Jackson winning the TV belt here, but goddamn did it make for great television. Of course, you fast forward later into the match where the people are actually starting a "Go Mike Go" chant. And as always the case with Arn matches on this show, great ring general. He lets his opponents get in enough offense to get a little bit of something, but by the time the match reaches the climax, Anderson starts cranking it up into another gear, starts firing back, and evidently leads to him winning in the end. But like I said, it's a completely different kind of heel match than, say, what Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey were doing on the show here, just humiliating guys and the match not even being semi-competitive. Arn's whole deal is he goes in, feeds for his opponents early on just to plant that little seed of doubt that maybe tonight's the night someone gets the lucky upset of a lifetime. And then, of course, the reality sets in that Arn's well in control of the match. He's able to manipulate the people to think that Mike fucking Jackson, of all people, stands a chance of becoming world's television champion. Yeah, in 2022, it's entirely possible that would happen, and people probably wouldn't bat an eyelash, but in 1986, these people at least still had a clue. Yeah. Again, before y'all go throwing out, this bitch and complain that AEW champions feed too much for job guys and the matches shouldn't be as competitive. The major thing you're leaving out in that argument is the fact that unlike every AEW champion we've seen up and down the card, no one in that company has established a level of skill and talent to anything close to Arn Anderson to make that story work. If Hangman Page was even a quarter as over as anyone in the Four Horsemen were by this period in 1986, there might be a general intrigue in seeing him do back and forth competitive title matches with guys like Dante Martin on TV. The problem, however, is that Page is not over as a world champion, and he doesn't have the ring credentials like Arn did to make those kinds of title matches work. So there's your problem. Following that great segment, we had Dusty and Baby Doll out. And another classic example of Dusty saying a bunch of words and me having mostly no idea what the fuck he was talking about. I believe he mentioned something about wrestling Ric Flair at the Superdome and winning the world title and something else about getting naked on TV, which not only left me dumbfounded and shaking in my boots, but I think it also caught Baby Doll off guard. I don't think Baby Doll had any interest in seeing Dusty without a shirt on. And quite frankly, I don't blame her. We had Jimmy Garvin at the booth to, well, no other way to put it, be a great heel. He let us know that he doesn't want people smoking during his matches because they might mess up his perfect hair. Hair that is apparently only insured by the Lloyds of London. And he also let us know that he showed up to wrestle Wahoo McDaniel, but since Wahoo's a coward, he decided to no-show because he's afraid of Garvin. And that, of course, led to Tony playing a video pre-tape of what was essentially a Wahoo highlight reel, most of which consisted of him just beating the shit out of Ric Flair. And again, if memory serves me right, I know these teases of Wahoo and Jimmy Garvin confronting one another end up going somewhere. Hopefully they don't hold it off too long, otherwise it'll become a Nikita Koloff Magnum TA situation of, can we just get the fucking match over with and stop talking about it? Manny Fernandez versus Tony Zane. I totally forgot Manny existed on this show. I don't even remember the last time I saw the Ragin' Bull work a match. It's been well over 2 months, at least in terms of the recaps here. Other than a couple racist taco remarks I heard from the crowd directed at Manny, I wrote nothing else down about it. Manny won with a flying burrito. It was also a rock and roll promo before the Manny match that I missed. They didn't say anything of value. We had Tully, Arn, and JJ back out for a promo. Arn with his hair totally slicked back for this promo, and I have to admit, that was a good look for Arn, even with the early onset of their receding hairline. And they mostly went back to complaining about the fact that they weren't ranked as the number 1 seed in the Crockett Cup. And that is when Baby Doll showed up, and the segment became an instant classic. So she starts heckling all the boys at the booth, eventually gets into J.J. Dillon's face, inferring that she can take J.J. on her worst day. So she gets into the ring, and she calls out JJ to fight her on live national television as she starts removing her gloves. And in one of the greatest TV moments of his entire career, JJ begins to undo his tie, remove his shoes, and start pumping himself up like a complete douchebag in preparation to get into a physical altercation with Baby Doll, of all people. Because he's a tough man. And as Tully and Arn go to try and talk JJ out of it, all 3 guys fall right for the bait as Magnum and Dusty run in from behind and start taking the fight to the heels in the ring. And yes, before we get too detailed here, for the record, the babyfaces jump in the heels from behind to get the advantage on the blind attack. I didn't get it either. And it actually doesn't go as smoothly for the faces as they probably anticipate, because after the heels get attacked from behind, the heels, the bad guys, begin to make the Valiant retaliation on the babyfaces, the good guys. And that, of course, leads to Magnum and Dusty turning the tables again. They end up targeting Arn's knee as Dusty drives the boot into it from the second turnbuckle. Tully ends up getting double teamed momentarily in the ring before the heels all get out of dodge. And like I said, if you completely discount and remove the glaring problem of the good guys attacking the bad guys from behind, it was a great segment. Crowd was totally into it. Faces got in a nice little momentary flurry of offense on the heels, but not too much where it ended up just turning into a mass beatdown, just enough to leave you wanting more. If only Magnum could have done this with Nikita and Ivan in their promo and do something constructive in that go-nowhere feud. And it should also be noted here that if AEW was actually going to go all in with the Brandy Rhodes-Dan Lambert feud, this is how you should have gone about doing it, guys. As opposed to just having Dan go out there and roast Brandy on the mic for 10 straight minutes and leaving her in there flopping like a fish out of water. It was entertaining. It was amusing. Bad television. And that was followed with Jimmy Valiant and Manny Fernandez out to put over the Crockett Cup. Valiant was wacky and great. Bull spoke in Spanish and no one cared. That was what I wrote down about the promo. Ron Garvin killed Kent Glover in short order. Really nothing else to note about that one. We had JJ Tully and Arn back out again, this time to let us know that Magnum and Dusty won the battle tonight, but the war is not over yet. And they also filled us in with the obvious that I just noted earlier, the fact that they got jumped from behind and didn't see it coming. Which, I mean, yes, I know they're bad guys. They're still not wrong. And this is where we had Nikita and Ivan out, so that Nikita could make fun of Magnum for sulking over the fact that he still hasn't signed the contract for their match. And then Ivan informed us that they ripped up Crockett's contract and that Nikita will wrestle Magnum on his own terms and conditions. So in other words, we are right back to square one of the go-nowhere, drawn-out, mind-numbing U.S. title program between these guys. In our main event match that I wrote absolutely nothing down for, Black Bart versus Carl Stiles. Actually, I lied. I did write something down. I wrote one word. Why? That is all. And just to put a quick bow on the show overall, the final segment featured Ronnie Garvin trying to speak, and he stumbled over himself so bad that Magnum had to cut in and finish the promo for him so that they could take the show home. I'm not kidding. That's a thing that actually happened. Magnum basically said, Ronnie, stop speaking. I'll take this one. Just stand there, shut up, and let's wrap this shit up. And had an on-men for the angle with Tully, Arn, JJ, Dusty, and Magnum. This probably would have been one of the worst episodes of World Championship Wrestling we've recapped thus far. There were a couple entertaining things on the show. The Midnight Express squash was fun. Arn's match was fun while it lasted. Like I said, the crowd was into a lot of stuff from top to bottom. But generally, the show didn't have a whole lot going for it. Just kind of another one of those shows with a lot of lifeless squashes and underwhelming promos. The Crockett Cup hype was good. I think you could tell, though, the big overarching story for the 1986 Crockett Cup was the fact that they couldn't book the Charlottetown to host a tournament, and it basically had to settle for New Orleans as a backup option. I mean, like I said, you could tell even in the demeanor from David and a lot of the other top personnel in the press conference, they weren't happy about it. I mean, they made the most out of the hand they were dealt, and I mean, come on, settling for the Superdome isn't exactly worth crying over spilt milk. And that'll bring us to this March 19th, 1983 edition of World Class Championship Wrestling. And as we learned from last week, this show was all centered around the Texas Heavyweight Showdown between gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and David Von Erich, which was definitely something refreshing as we started to enter a little bit of a lull period with the recycled Freebirds Von Erichs matches in the last few weeks. So if anything, this is a nice palate cleanser, and it made for an overall better show. First match for the card was Wild Bill Irwin versus the debuting Texan. And of course, you do one quick Google search on the Texan, and you find out it's Jake Roberts under a mask. Sorry if y'all are trying to avoid spoilers. And this was also before we'd actually see Roberts in World Class as a more active part of the roster. One interesting thing in the match, and it is entirely possible that Bill Mercer just fucked up and didn't realize it, but he referred to the atomic drop as the pile driver. I am actually curious as to whether or not that was a slip-up, or if they actually had different interpretations of the pile driver versus the atomic drop back in the day. Because I know they've also done this with other wrestling moves before, where they have like modified versions of it, where they like take the name for another move and it's like close enough where they kind of link them together, but it's not quite that same move. So, I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Really cool finish at the end there with Texan getting the schoolboy cradle pin on Irwin in the last 10 seconds of the match. Crowd really popped for that one. Mercer had brought up an interesting tidbit here during the match, too, that I thought was kind of funky. He briefly talked about the fact that Bill Irwin had close ties with Devastation Incorporated, but I don't know if he ever made full mention of whether or not he was a member of the group. And then it hit me later in the show during the Bundy promo that right now, Bundy is feuding with Arman Hussein and Toriatsu, and the only thing I could think after that promo was done, I was like, isn't this feud kind of one-sided? Like, Bundy's teaming with the Great Kabuki, and they're going up against a wrestler with 2 left feet, and the other guy is essentially a manager. And I'm also not entirely sure who the faces or the heels are in that program either. The whole Devastation Incorporated story in World Class is very odd in its early stages. That's all I can really say about it right now. Then we had the Iceman King Parsons taking on Buddy Roberts, which is one of the simplest yet most effective little angles in the book. Michael Hayes gets on the stick before the bell, basically tells the Iceman that Buddy will have no problem mopping the floor with him this evening. So, of course, Parsons grabs the mic, thanks Hayes for the input, gives him a nice little paintbrush slap across the face, and Iceman gives Buddy the hip attack for the pinfall in 4 seconds. And the great little angle afterwards with the heels calling the Iceman back out to the ring. Again, very well done. Because Iceman's not a fucking idiot, he does willingly come back out to the ring. But he's got backup. He's got extra reinforcement with the entire Von Erich family. Which, of course, evidently leads to the Freebirds getting out of Dodge and heading for greener pastures. Excellent television. And again, nothing overly convoluted, not overbooked, not overscripted all to hell. And it should also be noted that they managed to get King Parsons over as one of their top babyfaces in one 10-second showcase against the Freebirds. Meanwhile, you got 2 major wrestling organizations today that couldn't book a top babyface if their lives fucking depended on it. And I love this follow-up interview of the Von Erich Ranch with Mercer and David. And again, it's very simplistic and technically it's considered a promo, but God, even the way they shot these things back in the day were just so natural. It's so authentic with the way it's conducted. And David and Bill just bring a camera crew down to his ranch and they just start shooting the shit about the newborn foal that they have. I think that's what it's called, right? Newborn horses. Is that foal? Or am I thinking of a different breed of horse? I don't think pony would be right in this case, right? Anyway, that doesn't matter. It's a baby horse. But they get into a nice subtle transition on David's title defense against Jimmy Garvin. David puts over Jimmy and talks up his credentials, but basically establishes that he's too showboaty, and it doesn't equate to him being a champion until he gets the 1, 2, 3. A little bit of plugging of Ric Flair in there, and David putting over that he has aspirations to be a world champion someday. Like I said, man, it's a natural conversation between 2 human beings. It's not scripted out. It's not guys talking blankly into a camera. It doesn't come off like a stupid televised soap opera. And more importantly, it's so easy to digest what these guys are saying. I understood and contextualized every word that David spoke here because it felt like he was actually talking like a human being. He wasn't a fucking robot. Building up hype for the main event, talking about his future goals and ambitions, giving me a reason to care about where he goes in the company, and it wasn't a giant-ass monologue about a bunch of insider bullshit. Just nice to hear guys talk and not get so hung up on trying to be a second-rate knockoff of The Rock. We had King Kong Bundy in a squash against Mike Bond in his awful haircut. Really nothing too noteworthy about the action. Like one of those matches where I'm watching what's on screen, but I'm also subconsciously daydreaming and thinking about other things. Like every so often I'd come to and Bundy would have Bond on the mat in a hold, and then I realized I didn't miss anything. Bundy won. That's all you need to know. Like I mentioned earlier, he did the promo afterwards, hyping up a match with Toriatsu next week. Whew. Won't hold my breath for that one. And for our main event of the show, I actually really look forward to this one over the last week. Texas heavyweight title match between gorgeous Jimmy Garvin and David Von Erich. Just a prime model of two professionals that know how to work, know how to tell a good, competent story, and know how to keep the intrigue throughout. I mean, obviously, I don't need to put over how great Garvin is. I mean, you watched 3 seconds of a Jimmy Garvin match, and you know why we thought highly of him in the 80s. A naturally charismatic talent with charming wit that you just can't teach in most guys. One of the coolest spots of this entire match, I had to write this down. David has Jimmy in a standing headlock, and while he has a hold of Jimmy's head, David proceeds to start driving his head directly into his knee. How in the world no one has thought to do this spot in 2022, I have no idea. I would look forward to headlocks in every wrestling match if I knew that this would be a spot that guys go to. I'll get to the finish in a minute, but I did note this too. You know, you want to talk about a time back in the day when finishers meant something? The claw is one of those moves, man. When David got that claw on Garvin in the corner, everyone leapt to their feet. You know, even with Garvin managing to break free, like the claw is one of those moves back in the day where when people saw it, it got a reaction like nothing you'd ever seen before. Phenomenal stuff. The spot where David took the bump over the top to the floor after Garvin ducked out of the way, it actually took me until they zoomed the camera all the way out where I realized Sunshine was sitting no less than a foot away when David went sailing out to the floor. It's amazing he didn't end up punting her in the head. And the amazing thing is she didn't budge an inch. And they had a great finish here. David on the verge of getting counted out, and right as he gets back into the ring, Garvin grabs David, hoists him up, and gives him the brain buster, which Mercer is sure to inform us is an illegal move in world class. But of course, with Jimmy Garvin using the move all over the country with all the promotions he's wrestled in, the question now remains, did Garvin not know of the fact that the brainbuster was banned in world class? Or even worse, he knew about it, but he used it anyway. Because he's a heel. And God, David sold it great. Garvin becomes the new Texas heavyweight champion. Crowd, of course, is none too happy about that. In the post-match interview with Mercer, drawing attention to the finishing maneuver, Garvin is sure to let everyone know that he knows not of what Mercer speaks of with his brainbuster dilly bob. The move is called Bombs Away. God, Jimmy Garvin being so proud of himself for coming up with that name, just looking directly into the camera and smirking, just fucking fantastic. And like I said, man, I liked the post-match interview. It made the title change feel important. It came off better than Thunder Rosa beating Britt for the belt in that cage match on Dynamite. Great main event here. Great match, great finish. And now the story is all centered around the controversy of the brainbuster and whether or not David is entitled to a rematch with Garvin. And who knows, maybe he won't be permitted to use the move going forward. Almost like they built to a rematch. And they gave us a reason to want to see the rematch. Wow. Who'd have thunk it? It's almost like wrestling used to be so simple, yet so effective back in the day. I wonder why it used to draw money. Great show this week. You know, the Iceman segment with the Freebirds was perfect. The title change in the main event was great. Led to some potentially good story follow-up down the road in the coming weeks. And it should be noted, too, they managed to successfully get over a top babyface and a top heel in one show. Again, man, it's not rocket science. Wrestling doesn't need to be that hard. Just whenever guys think that wrestling needs to be scripted out and overly contrived where shit really hits the fan. You see it so often anymore in the business. It's just hard not to get numb to it over time. God, especially with WWE. I mean, AEW doesn't do themselves any favors with their schizophrenic, nonsensical booking either, but at least they have Punk and MJF to cover up when things get demonstrably bad. And as we close things out for this one, make sure to stop back in each week to check out new content on the FSWR channel. Make sure to sub, like, and comment. And again, if you want to check us out on Rumble, link for that is in the description. We'll be back this coming Monday for another show. I know WWE's been running a lot of Scott Hall tribute stuff on The Cock lately. I still have not checked out the documentary Living on a Razor's Edge. When did that come out? Was that 2016 or 2017? It's been out for several years now. And like I said, I've never seen it. If I have a little bit of free time on Friday evening, I might give that a watch and try to do some kind of review on that as a final segment for the Monday show, because I feel I owe it to Scott to try and share some more insight about him. He was a childhood favorite of mine. You know, probably not in a top 10 or maybe even like a top 15 in terms of all-time favorites, but I always had an appreciation for Scott's work. And, you know, I know I talked him up at the beginning here, but I really mean what I said. You know, despite the struggles and the battles with alcohol, drugs, all his personal problems, he really was a talent. And I think now would be a great time to check out that documentary and talk about it in detail. You know, see what holds up in 2022 and, you know, where I might find some disagreements or varying opinions on the WWE-driven narrative of Scott Hall's life. Could be interesting. Anyway, take care all. Peace.